Hey guys, this is John, and welcome to part 2 of Climbing the Rating Ladder. I'm back here on chess.com, and today I'm playing players in the 1000 to 1200 rating range exclusively, and we're going to see what we get. Part 1 was very interesting, and we got a lot of instructive games, and I'm hoping for the same in part 2. So I'm playing a player 1151 who opened with d4, and I played d5. He played e4, a gambit line, and I took the pawn, didn't think about it too much. We just accept the gambited pawn. White plays knight c3, attacking this e4 pawn. I'm going to play knight f6, just a solid developing move, defending the center pawn. Now, a good policy with gambits that I've often followed, and I mention to my students all the time, is take the first pawn on offer, but if they gambit the second pawn, do not take that one. So if black takes on f3, it's a playable line, but in my opinion, white will get pretty excellent compensation. So already I'll pose you a question here. What's a good developing move white can make that simultaneously helps us defend the center pawn? Okay, that one was kind of a softball question. It's bishop f5. So I bring this bishop into the game, and I help ensure that this pawn will not be simply recaptured by white for free. So if he takes it, I would take with my knight. Okay, so white has played bishop g5. I like this move by white. They're threatening to eliminate my knight and then take the pawn on e4. So I want to focus on quick development still. So I'm going to play knight bd7 so that in the case of bishop takes f6, I can recapture with my knight. If I were to single out one thing that players in this rating range, 1000 to 1200, do better than players under 1000, it would be difficult because there isn't one single thing. And you'll find that at every rating level in chess. There's no like light bulb that suddenly turns on once you hit a certain rating and you suddenly start, to not hang pieces, or your openings suddenly become amazing. It's just that the whole of your chess game is better. I mean, opening, middle game, and end game. You have more experience. You are doing more of the correct things, and your rating is reflecting that. But there's not one single thing that you'll probably notice at a certain level. It's many different things. Okay, so my opponent plays d5. This is an interesting move. They are kind of cramping me with that move. And they are perhaps making it difficult for me to play my pawn to e6. I could do that, and if they take, maybe take with my f pawn. I would like to get this dark square bishop in the game, but I'm a little skeptical of pawn to e6. I might play pawn to c6, actually. I'm kind of looking at that as a decent opportunity. Yeah, you know what? I'm going to play that move, pawn to c6. I don't like the fact that this d5 pawn is cramping my pieces, so I'm going to try to get rid of it. I do want to get this dark square bishop out, though, soon, so I can castle. White is lagging somewhat in their kingside development, so look for them to bring those pieces out, or alternatively, maybe they'll continue developing their queenside and prepare to castle queenside. Okay, so they play pawn to d6. As far as I can tell, I can just take that pawn. E takes d6. They can take on e4 in that case, whereupon I am in a pin with my knight. So when I play e takes d6, my knight would be pinned to my queen. But after e takes d6, let's say f takes e4, I can just drop my bishop back, maybe bishop g6 or bishop e6, and I will still be ahead a pawn. So I'm going to play like this. And by the way, this is a 5-minute game with a 5-second increment, meaning that we get 5 seconds added every move. I recommend playing with an increment time control when you're starting out. So he does recapture. Now, it would be a big mistake for me to take the pawn on e4, because after knight takes e4, as I mentioned, there's a pin going on. I would not be able to recapture. So I'm just going to move my bishop away. I'm just debating which square to go to, g6 or e6. I somewhat prefer e6, I think. It prevents him from playing bishop c4. However, there is something to be said about g6 too, because it kind of eyes the pawn on e4 still. Maybe I will go to g6. Yeah, I'll play bishop to g6. Bishop e6 would have been fine as well. Bishop g4 would have attacked white's queen, but it gives him an opportunity maybe with queen takes g4, or maybe simply just to play a developing move like knight f3. So I like our bishop. My opponent has come out pretty aggressively. This is the Blackmar-Daymar gambit. It's the name of the line that they played. Okay, knight f3 makes sense. I'm just going to keep it simple. Bishop e7. In doing so, I prepare to castle short. I get my remaining piece into the game, and just an all-around useful move. They play bishop d3. I think that's smart. They're reinforcing e4. Now, I suspect that white's next move will probably be castles kingside, if given the opportunity. So, for instance, if I castle kingside, they will do the same. I see that I can pop my queen out to b6 and maybe disrupt that plan a bit. I'm going to do that. Normally, I would just castle, because that's kind of on my to-do list, get my king to safety. But I have this opportunity to disrupt their castling and attack the pawn on b2. And I'm just going to take it. Seize the opportunity. I would say white has not obtained full compensation for the pawn. It's a little early to determine whether they will get sufficient play, but my initial feeling is there's not enough for them to show for the pawn. So they play rook b1, simply defending b2. So here again, as in the last video, I have a choice of which way to castle. In one of the games, I also faced a similar decision. And I think I'm just going to castle short. I could castle long, but I'm ahead one pawn. Okay, here we go. Big blunder by white, bishop e3. And you see they played that move instantly. It's kind of a baffling move. This bishop is undefended. So I can simply take it with my queen. There's nothing defending that piece. So what you'll see at the 1,000 to 1,200 level is players are still not immune to blundering pieces, and they won't be for a while. I think you'll even notice this in the higher rating level videos too. People still blunder pieces. That's just a free 3-point piece he gave me. Now queen e2. Ask yourself, we just won a piece. How do we feel about trading queens? Hopefully the answer by now is we are ecstatic to trade queens, because we want to simplify the game and go about winning the position with minimal risk. Okay, he takes with the knight. This leaves the e4 pawn insufficiently defended. I have my bishop and my knight attacking that, and now, by virtue of having captured with the knight, the bishop, for them, is the only piece defending it. So what are we going to do? We're going to take it. And I'll take with the bishop to further encourage trades. I could have taken with the knight, but doing the capture with the bishop allows me to trade further. So let's keep trading down. All right, so now we're up a piece plus 2 pawns. I'm going to play rook fe8. This e-file is the only truly open file in the game. And in doing this, I can prepare to occupy it in the future. One idea I have next is to move my bishop back, maybe to f8. If his knight's still sitting on e2, there might be a discovered attack on that knight. Okay, rook c1. His rook was not doing anything on the b1 square anymore. There was no reason to defend the b2 pawn. I'm going to play pawn to d5. This sets up a potential bishop to c5 check threat, hitting the king and also opening up the rook and the knight. Yeah, so I predict in many of these games you'll see my opponents continually playing loose moves and putting pieces on undefended squares, putting pawns on undefended squares, and handing material to you, essentially. And you want to be ready to seize it. And that's not a knock against my opponent, Thunder Ryan. It's just a symptom of the play at this level. It's very common, and until you get a handle on that, as I've said previously, it's difficult to make progress. Like, you can still rise up the rating ladder and make blunders, but you really want to focus on getting that under control. You have to be hard on yourself when making those blunders, and if you drop a piece as he did, you have to go back through your game once the game is finished and figure out why you made and try to figure out why you made that blunder. In his case, I think it was because he just played the move instantly without thinking about it. It was about a 1-second move. h3. I could bring my bishop in maybe to attack on f4, hit his rook on c1. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to prepare to double my rooks. I'm going to play rook e7 and bring this rook over to e8. I like having both rooks bearing down the open file. We have a nice pawn structure. These pawns kind of complement our bishop. Notice how I placed them on light squares, the d5 pawn and the c6 pawn. And I have a bishop on d6. That's harmonious. Your pawns are not getting in the way of your bishop. Okay, he plays a3. Looks like he's going to play b4. I could just double up, but I want to see how he reacts to a prophylactic move. A prophylactic move is a move you make that prevents your opponent's threat. So by playing a3, I think he'll be trying to go g4, so I want to see how he reacts to a5, just preventing that idea. Now I have two defenders on the b4 square. All right, he moves his rook. I'll do the same, just double my rooks up. He could play g4 on this wing, but that's kind of in front of his king, and I don't mind if he does that. He's been doing a good job over the last several moves in avoiding piece trades. If he had just simply put a rook on e1, we would have had massive trades, and the more pieces that come off the board, the closer I get to victory. Okay, knight h4. Here we have a chance to make another prophylactic move. So ask ourselves, why did our opponent play the knight to h4? Knights on the edge of the board are usually bad, so he's probably not going to be sticking around there with the knight for very long. So hopefully we discern that the answer is knight f5. He wants to sink the knight into f5. So I'm going to play pawn g6 and prevent that. He did open up the rook too, but notice I have my other knight on d7 protecting the knight on f6. Aaron Nimzovich, the very famous chess author who wrote My System, he talked about this concept of overprotection. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to play knight e4 in this position, offering a trade of knights and also threatening knight g3 check, which would be a fork on the king and the rook. But Aaron Nimzovich, who wrote My System, which is a great book, a classic book, I would recommend checking it out if you haven't read it. But he talks about the concept of overprotection. So protecting a weak square or a piece multiple times. And what you saw there was I had overprotection of the f6 knight. So I could afford to play the the g6 pawn move because my knight on d7 was defending. Okay, I'm going to bring this rook in. I'm going to play a little bit faster. My time is getting down with all of this talking. But that 5-second increment is very nice. Knight g5, aggressive move, attacking my f7 pawn twice. I'm just going to play pawn f5. He's trying to gang up on that pawn with his knight plus his rook. So we eliminate his idea. Thunder Ryan is doing the right thing now, though. He's trying to create threats, trying to make the game complicated. He did just give me that b2 pawn, so I will take it. I'm going to play this rook down. I could take, but then I would be giving him the file. And I was a little bit worried, like maybe he could come in with a rook or something down there. So I'm okay with trading. We're up a lot of material now. Okay, I'm definitely okay with this trade. So now he's just traded in successive moves his two most powerful pieces. Scan the board real quick. Do you see any undefended pieces or pawns in white's position? Hopefully you saw that the pawn on a3 was undefended. So let's go take it. All right, now I'm going to advance my a pawn. We're pretty much only fighting against his knight. He's offering trades again. I'm completely happy with that. I'm just going to bring my bishop back, ensure that this pawn is blocked, and my a pawn is a breakaway pawn. It's going to get a queen. Now it'll just be a matter of checkmating my opponent. And I think I'll be able to corner him pretty quickly. Let's give a check here. Force him backwards a little bit. Let's play this pawn up. I'm not going to be overly worried about stalemate when he has 3 pawns remaining. Moreover, I'm not going to go and gobble these pawns. I'm just going to focus on getting a checkmate. Now he has to go to the back rank here or here. And what I can do is, this is perhaps not the fastest move, but I like the instructive value behind it. Cut off his king. His king was confined to the first rank, and he resigned. Okay, so just scanning this game real quickly. And I changed browsers, by the way. I'm using Firefox in this one. Previously, I've used Chrome in most of my videos, but I was told that Firefox helps handle, when you go back and analyze the games on chess.com like this, it helps handle the variations a bit better. So we'll see if that's true. So I was following this policy of taking the first pawn, but not taking the second pawn. I think that's a useful rule of thumb. Unless you have specific knowledge in a gambit line and you know that accepting, a couple pawns in a row is okay. But you can't really go wrong with this approach. So he's trying to develop, he's trying to get an initiative for the sacrifice pawn, and I'm simply bringing my pieces out in defense and not getting too greedy. So I like moves like bishop f5. You see, defending the e4 pawn twice, but not forsaking my development in order to win another pawn. Because yeah, I could take, this is a line, but after knight takes f3, he is able to develop quickly. So I think bishop f5 is a nice compromise. And as I said, that bishop e3 move that he made later on was his big mistake. I had a queen sitting on b6, and he just played bishop e3, outright blunder. All right, let's look for another game. Searching for another 5-minute game with a 5-second increment. And my advice to you guys would be to play even longer games as you're going up through the rating levels. The time control that I think is a pretty good one is 15 minutes with a 10-second increment. I like that time control a lot. Here I'm going to play e4, e5. I think the blitz time controls are a little bit fast if you're trying to play solid chess. You do get more practice in a shorter period of time with blitz, but the quality of your games is going to be a lot lower. Okay, so this is the King's Gambit, f4. You can take the Gambit pawn if you want. That's completely fine. But you know what I like against this? I like just bishop c5. This is a move I used when I was at this rating level, and it has a trap behind it. If they take the pawn on e5, you might see what can happen. Black can play queen h4 check. Okay, and he pushed past, so he's made another pawn move. In the 1,000 to 1,200 range, you'll still see people making too many pawn moves. Okay, so this is his third pawn move in his first 3 moves as white. He hasn't developed any pieces. I have a bishop out that is on a great diagonal, by the way. And here I can play queen h4 check, attacking his exposed king. And in order to avoid mate, because king e2, queen takes e4 is mate, and he just resigned right away. But in order to avoid mate, he would have to play pawn to g3 right now. But then we get queen takes e4, attacking the king, attacking the rook. And we're going to go up an entire rook out of this. I suppose he could play queen e2, take, and maybe take here. But his knight on g1 will be hanging. I think we could even drop the bishop back if we wanted. He can go take this pawn on g7, but notice we have bishop f6 to defend, attack the queen, and also defend the rook behind it. So bishop c5 is a good reply to the King's Gambit. Sometimes people get thrown off by this move, this Gambit move, but I like bishop c5. And same thing, you saw what happened if he pushed, but same thing if he took on e5, we would also go check with a similar idea. And if the king comes up, this is mate. It's a nice mate where we're point blank checking the white king, and he cannot go to that flight square because of the bishop. The main line goes knight f3, so white just develops a piece and attacks e5, and then black can play d6. And I like the fact that the bishop is outside the chain, and it's also stopping white from castling. And this pawn on e5 is still immune from capture. If white goes about taking it, he will be met with a similar fate. Here, check. All right, let's search for another game. So we've played 2 games so far with good results, both games with black. I'm still sticking with my e4, e5 double king pawn repertoire that I was talking about in the under 1,000 video. You'll see opening-wise, you don't really have to do too much at the lower rating levels. Even as you're working your way all the way up to, decent class level, let's say even like 1,600 to 2,000. Even in that rating range, you can get away with playing straightforward openings. They don't have to be too fancy. Just find openings that you feel comfortable with, and openings where you have a taste for the type of middle games that you'll get. And the way you can figure that out is look at games played by good players in those openings. Check out Grandmaster games, even games of lower-rated players, and see if the type of position that arises is to your style. And trend towards classical openings. I mentioned last time I wouldn't mess around with hypermodern openings like g6 or even stuff like the Alekhine's defense, knight f6 is a little tougher to handle if you're lower rated. If you're playing just for fun and you don't mind perhaps not playing in classical fashion, then by all means go ahead. But my advice is mainly geared towards players who want to improve and rise up the ratings as efficiently as possible. So again, I'm sticking with e5. I might throw in a Sicilian in a future video. We'll see. But for now, we're playing our usual openings. So knight f3, knight c6. Our opponent plays bishop b5, the Ruy Lopez. I'm going to play a6 and question what his bishop is doing. And he takes. Yeah, so in this case, you want to take with the d pawn. That's important. If you take with the b pawn, there are some troubles that can arise. But taking with the d pawn opens up the possibility of queen d4, which is useful in the case that he were to play knight takes e5. So I'll demonstrate that after the game. So pawn to d3. Now that white has protected their e4 pawn, I might want to protect my e5 pawn. That's a good rule of thumb in the Ruy Lopez. Because let's say I were to play, I don't know, knight f6 right now. He could take the pawn, and queen d4, which would previously have attacked the knight and the pawn on e4, is no longer as effective because the e4 pawn is defended. He could just move his knight away. That said, I'm going to play kind of a sneaky move, bishop c5. I'm going to see if he takes that pawn on e5. If he does, I will have a little combo involving the f2 point. So for instance, if knight takes e5, I can play either bishop takes f2 check, king takes f2, and then queen d4 check, or I can play queen d4 right away, looking to attack the knight and the pawn. Here I just have to figure out which one's better. They both look pretty attractive in my opinion. If queen d4 right away, then I'm threatening mate, whereas bishop takes f2 just kind of looks to get my material back. So one line I would look at would be queen to d4. Let's say he plays bishop to e3, queen takes e5, and then he has d4. But then I can take the pawn on e4. He'll take my bishop on c5, and I can grab g2, hitting the rook. So I like the look of that. So I'm going to play it, this queen d4 move. He can play knight g4, trying to simultaneously save the knight and also defend f2, but notice that I have bishop takes g4 in that case. My advice to white players who play this opening, the Ruy Lopez, would be to take a very good look around before you grab the pawn on e5 in a Ruy Lopez. You just want to make sure something like this doesn't happen to you. And it's good that Aqua 557 is pausing to think, because this is a move that probably caught him off guard. And when you're faced with a surprise, you have to expend more time. You don't just want to flash out a move and call it a day. You have to think a little bit. You have to gather your thoughts. You have to figure out how to properly respond. I've had opponents in the past who will intentionally try to move quick when encountered by a surprise, a move that I know they have not seen, because they somehow think it will rattle me. But that's a terrible strategy. I hope I don't have to explain why that's a terrible strategy. Just don't do that. I've seen even very good players do that, surprisingly. Okay, so he played the move that I was mentioning, bishop e3. I could take the pawn on b2 and try to go after the rook, but that looks a little complicated to me. I think just taking the full knight is better. He might have seen that he can play d4 now. He missed it, though. So d4 would have been the best try for white, which would have forked my queen to my bishop. Now I can simply recapture, and if we do a material head count here, I'm up a piece. And he only has one pawn to show for it. So knight c3. All right, so see how quickly we've won material? Now I'm going to go into the same mode that I had in the first game. Just trying to simplify the position if possible. I'm not going to be just overtly playing for simplifications all the time. I'm still going to play the position, but that should be our overall game plan. We're not going to back down from just trying to take the game into an endgame if possible and win with our extra material. So I swung the queen over to g5. It was under attack from his pawn. Here I'm hitting the pawn on g2. And we'll see how he responds. He could castle, whereupon I would consider bishop h3, but instead he plays h4. Not a good move. Hangs the pawn on g2. Now I'm hitting his rook. If rook f1, which is the only safe square for the rook, I can play this bishop all the way into h3. And notice how his rook has nowhere to go. And I'm threatening to just capture it with my queen-bishop battery on f1. So we're 12 moves into this game, and white has already made some questionable decisions. Well, not questionable, just white has made mistakes. Taking on e5 was premature. I don't think they considered the ramifications of that in regards to the f2 points. After bishop e3, queen takes e5, they missed the fork d4, and now they hung the pawn on g2. All right, I'm just going to bank the material here and take the rook. I could maybe delay this move, but we're going to be up basically an entire rook here, so All right, now I haven't got my rooks into the game yet, whereas I've completed my development otherwise. So I'm going to castle, which gets this rook to bear down on the d4 pawn right away. I could have also played rook to d8, because usually when the queens are off the board, you don't mind the fact that your king is in the center. But you know why I like castling? It's because it connects the rook together. If I had simply played rook to d8, then my king and the kingside rook would be kind of in the way of the communication with my other rook here on d8. So good move by him, knight e2, just defending this. Let's get this guy to the center. Maybe we can move our knight and attack the e4 pawn. He's coming at us with the c4 pawn. I could play knight g6 right now, which would hit h4 and would also open up the attack here. Yeah, I think I like that. He can chase me with the h5 pawn, but then I can simply play like knight h4. Yeah, and he saw the attack on e4, maybe didn't see this attack on the h-pawn, so we'll go gather that one. Knight f4. This hangs another pawn. If you want to try to figure out which pawn it is, you can pause your video if you like. So the pawn that it hangs is the d4 pawn, so we'll go capture that. Just mowing down the material. Yeah, and he resigns. Okay, so just a quick recap of that. So we were faced with the Roy Lopez, and I like this move a6 because it puts the question to the bishop. And at higher levels, you usually see bishop a4. So white will just retreat the bishop and proceed from there. But taking is fine, and you just want to remember that you want to take with the d-pawn in this exact position. Usually you want to capture towards the center. That's the general rule at play in most positions, is if you have a choice of pawn recaptures, you want to take with the pawn towards the center. But the reason we take this way is because of kind of what was demonstrated in the game. It enables the queen to come to d4. And he played d3 right now, just defending the e4 pawn. But if he had captured on e5, I would have done the same move as in a couple moves. Queen d4, attacking the knight, attacking the pawn on e4. So d3, this bishop c5 move. And like I said, if you're playing white in this opening, you just should be very cautious about taking that e5 pawn. It would have been a safer idea simply to castle for white. And after they've castled, I have less threats against their king. Queen d4 would lose value because of the rook helping out to defend the f2 pawn. So I would have had to play a move like maybe even f6 to guard that pawn, or queen d6 to guard it as well. Maybe bishop g4, pinning the knight to the queen. Something along those lines. Yeah, as played though, right here was probably his biggest missed opportunity. Once I took his knight, he has to find the move d4, forking the queen and the bishop. And after d4, I can take on e4, but he does gain the piece back. So, okay, I just learned a new thing. If I hit the current button, you guys can't see this, it's off screen, but if I hit the current button, it actually reverts back to the game. Okay, that's excellent. So now I can show variations, like, for instance, if this knight takes e5 move I was mentioning, queen d4, attacking the knight, attacking the pawn. And I'll regain the pawn. He's got to address his knight, and we take here. But as played, once he goes down the piece, bishop e3 takes, and then simply traded with me rather than doing the fork. It was very tough. But you see the pawns that he needlessly gave me. I mean, I know he's losing here, but it still bears repeating. h4, he just gave me the g2 pawn. He lost a rook after that. That was maybe somewhat forced, but here we were able to go about winning the remainder of his pawns. In his defense, it's very difficult now. He's just down a lot of material, and when you have less defenders than your opponent, it's going to be tough for you. All right, so let's search for a new game. Just in the moment that we're waiting here, maybe I can explain what to do in the event that you play this opening and your opponent plays bishop a4, because that is a move that a lot of people will play. In that case, I would go back to development. I would play knight f6 and attack that pawn on e4. Leonard Austin, 1149, is the next opponent. It's another black game we have. He opens with d4. This is good, so we get to play d5. And let's see if someone plays the Queen's Gambit. You won't encounter that opening too much, but I'm hoping someone plays the Queen's Gambit sometime. All right, so our opponent plays e3. I'm not a big fan of this move because it does block in that bishop on c1. So I'm not going to respond in kind. There's no reason to play e6 here. There's not enough pressure on our center yet. to justify e6. e6 is a fine move. It's just I never really like blocking in the light square bishop when you don't have to. I'm going to play knight f6. Now, if he attacks my pawn on d5 with his pawn on c4, then I might consider playing e6. But until that happens, I don't see a reason to go about playing e6. Okay, f3, bad move. Do not play your f-pawn up this early, unless it's part of a specific opening, but even then I'm skeptical. But move 3, just so as you saw in that King's Gambit game a couple games ago, my opponent has played 3 pawn moves as white, and none of them have been particularly useful, aside from d4, of course. But e3, f3, his moves are going downhill a little bit. There's no point to this move. It weakens his king. It also blocks his knight from coming to f3. It's just a bad move. So I'm going to develop bishop f5 and hopefully continue with e6. Now I feel comfortable playing e6 because my bishop on c8 is not being blocked by the pawn. All right, h4. This is actually a clever little trap. And if you want to pause your video and ask yourself, what is white's threat after h4, you can do that now. Okay, so white is threatening to trap my bishop. His idea is to play g4. So if I were to play some move like knight bd7, let's say, he's going to play g4, attacking my bishop. I drop the bishop back to g6, and then he's going to play h5. A very clever trap by white. But I can play a prophylactic move. I'm going to play h5 and stop him from playing g4. I did have to play a rook pawn move in defense, but I think it's okay. I mean, he played a rook pawn move himself, and he's played some other questionable moves, so I'm okay in doing that. Knight ge2. Let's play our bishop out. Thinking about playing to d6. I like this because it eyes the g3 square. If his knight ever leaves e2, I might play bishop g3 check. He's already somewhat weakened on the king side. Pretty significantly weakened, actually. So maybe the dark squares around his king, like f2 and g3, maybe the h4 pawn to some extent, will be targets in the future. Okay, he plays e4. I looked at that move when I played bishop d6 because if I were to move my bishop away right now, like bishop g6, he could come up and fork us with pawn e5, attacking the bishop and the knight. But if we size up the attackers and defenders on e4, we notice that I have one more attacker than he has defenders. So I have 1, 2, 3, pawn, bishop, knight, and he only has 1, 2, knight plus pawn. So that means we're safe to take this. And I expect him to take with the pawn or the knight, and I'll probably take with my knight. It could also take with a bishop. I think either one is fine. I said in the previous video that you should slightly prefer bishops over knights, everything else being equal. Kind of a minor thing, but you don't want to needlessly go into positions where you're giving up your bishops for your opponent's knights. Okay, so he might have realized that he just dropped a pawn, so he just pushes past f4. I like this now. We've got a nice pawn on e4. This piece is not yet developed. Could put it on c6. Yeah, actually, I think I will. Sometimes in d-pawn openings, you have to be cautious about blocking your c-pawn. This is something I mentioned in my chess fundamental series too. But developing the knight through c6 is fine here. I'm fully coordinated. I've got all my minor pieces in the game. I kind of like this square better than d7 because maybe attacking the d4 pawn and also the possibility of knight b4 could be useful in the future. Okay, d5. So another pawn move in the middle of the board. This is not going to work out well for white. And if you want to pause your video and try to figure out why, you can do that. So black to move. How should I play, and how do you think the game will go? Okay, so I'm going to take the pawn on d5. We have 2 defenders of the d5 square, and he does have 2 defenders as well, or I should say 2 attackers of the d5 square. He has 2 defenders, the knight plus the queen. So the game could go e takes d5, knight takes d5, knight takes d5, queen takes d5. Now, that looks like an even trade, which it is, but white's queen on d5 is undefended, and at that point I will have a discovered attack, bishop b4 check, hitting his king and also opening up queen takes queen. Let's see if he falls into that trap. He might realize something's up. Okay, so he perhaps realized that I was trying to set up that bishop b4 check idea, so he plays a different move, knight g3, attacking my bishop. I'm going to go here. This is a good square for the bishop, attacking his queen. I love this g4 square for our piece because he's already moved his f plus his h pawn, so the bishop is impervious to a white pawn attacking it on this square. He plays bishop e2. Are we okay with the trade? Yeah, I'd say so. Let's take. See which way he recaptures. Takes with the knight. I'm going to castle. That trap with knight takes d5, queen takes d5, bishop b4 check is still there. So I'm going to give him one more opportunity to fall into it. Oh, and he did. He didn't do it the first time, so I thought he might have seen it, but it looks like maybe he missed it. If he doesn't play queen takes d5 now, he definitely realized the error of his last move. Okay, he played it, but now we get this discovered check and go after the queen. So got to watch those undefended pieces. That's a queen right in the middle of the board. There was only one piece in the way between my queen and his queen, that dark square bishop. And he plays knight c3. We can simply take d5 because of the pin. He cannot recapture. That would be illegal. His king is behind his knight. And he resigned. All right, let's take a quick look at that one. So d4, d5, just responding symmetrically. If he had played c4 here, I was planning on playing the Queen's Gambit declined with e6. But instead, he plays e3. And this is not a terrible move. I mean, it actually builds a nice little pawn chain from him. But I do not like that move because it blocks in his dark square bishop unnecessarily. So after e3, I just don't want to fall into the trap of playing the same thing. Like, I could play e6, but why? I mean, why block in your bishop? The primary purpose of e6, aside from trying to develop the dark square bishop, is to fortify the d5 pawn. And he's not attacking the d5 pawn yet, so I don't have to do that. So hence, if I return to the game, after d4, d5, e3, I just played knight f6, and he played f3. Yeah, of the three moves he's made, this is by far the worst. f3 is a move that can only hurt him and does not help him much. It weakens his king, like this diagonal's exposed. He takes away the natural square for his knight, and he's falling behind in development. So I played bishop f5. He could chase me with the g-pawn, but I would have just dropped the bishop back to g6. At this point, he played that... sorry, it keeps skipping back, but that's just how it is when I reload it. But he did play a little trap here, h4, after bishop f5, knight c3, e6, h4. So his trap was, if I play my knight here, he was going to play g4, hitting the bishop g6, and then pawn h5, and I would have ran out of space. You see this trap in various forms. Sometimes it happens on the queen side as well. So your opponent will play a bishop pawn up one square, and then kind of innocently push the rook pawn too. And if you get blindsided by this, you won't even see the knight pawn coming down two squares and trying to trap your bishop. So I played h5, a prophylactic move stopping his threat. Just develop from there. Yeah, he dropped a pawn, e4. He doesn't have enough defenders, the pawn and the knight. I have 1, 2, 3 defenders on that square. So we took that pawn. Yeah, and then d5 drops another pawn. And I'm a little surprised he didn't take it right away because he did do this in a couple more moves, but he went and attacked our bishop. I moved it here, attacking his queen. Bishop e2, we're fine with a trade. Yeah, and then he wound up blundering again. But even if he doesn't blunder, he's down 2 pawns for nothing at this point. He's already weakened himself. Notice that if he were to castle now, his king is very shaky here. He's already moved 2 of the 3 pawns that traditionally provide protection for the king. So his king is very much open. Like maybe I could consider knight g4, which abandons the defense of my d5 pawn. Now he could take that pawn without fear of that same tactic, but it opens up queen takes h4. And once again, a piece on this square, it's impervious to a knight, or a pawn rather, pushing it around because he can't play h3 or f3 to try to kick it away. He's already pushed these pawns there. Okay, let's look for another game. I think I'm going to play maybe 2 more games. Got some good stuff in these videos already, or in this video. I do think players at this level play a little bit more confidently than the sub 1000 players. I have noticed that often they make aggressive decisions more quickly, almost like they're trying to like bully around hesitant opponents a little bit. Okay, so here we have a 1008. I think this is the lowest player of the several players we've played so far. He opens with e4. Yeah, well, yeah, let's play e5 still. I was thinking about throwing in a Sicilian, but I think I'm going to save that for the 1200 to 1400 level. Because as I've said, the things that work sub 1000 are going to work great, openings included. a3, that's funny, because we saw a game in the previous video where my opponent did this as well, I believe, on move 3. So I'm going to do the same thing I did there, which is play knight f6. This move doesn't really have a point. Yeah, this is the same position I had in the under 1000 video. So if I play bishop c5, they can do this center fork trick, knight takes e5. I'm kind of curious if they'll do that. But you know what? I'm just going to play d6, though. Same move I play. h3, that's a prophylactic move of his, stopping bishop g4. But I think moving 2 of your rook pawns in the first 5 moves is not wise. Okay, let's just play bishop e7. I could fianchetto the bishop too. He plays bishop here. This light square bishop, it's not going to come out to g4 or f5. They're both covered by white pawns. Could come to e6, but I'm going to assign it to the d7 square so that if he takes as he does, then I can just recapture. So this type of move that white just played, and I'm going to back up a second because I can here. So that's a move you want to avoid in almost all occasions. He takes my knight for no apparent reason. It's just an exchange. And exchanges are the easiest moves to make because you can always justify it as, well, I am taking a piece. Isn't that something good? And the answer is, yeah, you're taking a piece, but every trade has to have a function, and simply capturing just to capture is not enough of a rationale. So I'm going to take back. Now I have the bishop pair, and I didn't have to damage my pawns in the process. I developed that bishop to d7, and I'm recapturing with a bishop. I didn't have to play the pawn on b7 takes c6. Also now, try to figure out, what am I attacking? What is black's threat? The answer is I'm attacking the e4 pawn. Now that my bishop is on c6, I have my bishop and my knight bearing down on this pawn. If he were to castle, for instance, I could just take it. I would play knight takes e4. We'll see how he reacts. He should play pawn to d3, maybe queen e2, but probably pawn to d3. It's funny looking at, these are all rated games, and I'm looking at the estimated points that I win or lose, or win or lose based on the result. If I win, I get 0 points. If I draw, I lose 45 rating points. And if I lose 89 rating points in this game. So maybe that's a sign that some of you guys should like stalk me on chess.com, and when I play these low rated players, try to jump in. It's a free shot at my 2294 rating. He's taking some time here. I wonder what he's pondering, because he's played very quickly up till this point. He's going into the tank a little bit. But d3 would certainly be the most reliable move to defend the pawn on e4. Yeah, and he plays it, so good for him. He played that, the best move. I'll castle. Probably he should do the same. I would say overall, white hasn't played anything egregiously bad quite yet. These are just kind of micro errors. I mean, the pawn move, like a3 especially, wasn't a very good move, and the trade wasn't particularly good. But the good news for him is that none of these decisions has compromised his position yet. He still has a fully playable position. Now, I would kind of like to play d5, like advance in the center. But if I play that move, it leaves my e5 pawn undefended. And I don't like that so much. I could play a queen move, like queen up to d7, and maybe connect my rooks together. Moving my knight actually seems like the most tempting thing to do. I could play knight d7 or knight e8 and maybe try to push pawn to f5. But you know what? I'm just going to play queen d7. because I think this move is completely fine. It connects my rooks together. I will freely say this might not be the move I would play against someone my own rating, but I like how harmonious it is. And you know what? No, I might play h6 to try to see if he'll take here, but I kind of have a read, since he played bishop takes c6 on the other wing, that he might take here without me having to prompt him. So let's just play a rook to the middle. This file is closed, but I have a feeling in the future, if ever I push d5, it might become open. So let's see if he takes on f6. Most players are pretty predictable when you spot certain habits that they have. Okay, he didn't do it. He pushes the b4 pawn instead. So he's taking a stab at my queen side. b5 is not a threat. I'm just going to play rook fe8. If he plays b5, I have my bishop and my queen defending that square. Okay, a4. Now b5 is actually a threat, because it'd be backed up by his pawn. So I'm going to play a6, put a stop to his b5 idea. To be honest, though, of all my opponents so far, I think this guy has played the best, which is good for you, GeoX, because you're the lowest rated of all the players I've played so far, and you haven't given me a whole lot to work with yet. a5. Okay, here I am going to play h6. He hasn't shown that he's going to take it, so maybe we'll just do this ourselves. He drops the bishop back, pulls the bishop back to e3. Okay, so yeah, for whatever reason, he didn't want to take that knight. Now, I'd really like to push that d5 pawn. I think my pieces are primed in the middle for me to bust it open. But again, if I push d5, I'm going to lose this pawn. So I'm going to bring this bishop back to f8 as a precautionary measure. Now my rook helps to defend the e5 pawn, and I'm ready to play d5 and open it up. I would like to open the position because I have the pair of bishops, and also I'm very centralized right now. This pawn on h6 is nice. It stops something from coming to g5. Sometimes this move is helpful when it's not played too early in the game. You know, when you're playing like h3 or a3 very early like he did, it's usually not the best use of your time when you still need to bring your pieces into the game. But later in the game, it can be useful. All right, rook e1. And I think I'm all primed for this d5 move, which incidentally opens up the bishop to attack the b4 pawn. So we're going ahead with that move, d5. So if he takes it, notice all the pieces I have backing up that square. I have my knight, my bishop, my queen, and my rook. So hopefully we can narrow it down to either bishop capture or knight capture. So maybe if you want to quiz yourself based on what we've discussed, pause your video, ask yourself which way you would recapture. Would you take with the bishop or the knight? Okay, I'm going to take with the knight. Since he has a knight on c3 and we're likely to trade, I like the fact that my light square bishop's going to survive. Notice that this diagonal is becoming more open. So I like the fact that I have this queen-bishop battery and I have an unopposed light square bishop. I'm still attacking b4. Let's see if he notices that. He needs to defend that somehow. Unfortunately for him, if he plays c3 in order to defend it, he'd be losing his d3 pawn, and I would have my queen and my rook attacking d3, and he only has his queen defending. So a good defensive move for him would be rook b1. Bishop d2 is also fine, and he found a good one as well. Bishop d2 defending that guy. I think I'm going to play e4 now and further open up the position. When you have rooks centralized behind your pawns, usually you want to try to advance the pawns and create open lines. And I think with the pair of bishops, I'm just emboldened by the files and the diagonals that are becoming available to me. So he can trade e4. We've got our queen and bishop backing it up. Queen takes e4. Notice now we have his rook on, or his bishop on d2 pinned down by our rook on d8. This is an undefended piece, so I got to watch it. But he can't move his bishop away because he would lose the queen behind it. So in that case, what is black threatening? What is my threat in this position? Answer is, I'm threatening bishop takes b4, still. Even though he has his bishop defending it, he cannot take because of the pin. Once again, he would lose a larger piece, the queen, behind it. So he plays rook to a3, maybe trying to swing the rook over to e3. But I do have this move. Bishop takes b4. And we'll see how he reacts to that. This is honestly the first major mistake he's made all game. He's lasted like 20 plus moves now without making a major mistake. Rook e3, okay, hitting the queen. I'll probably play queen g6. I could play queen d5, but queen d5 would be a blunder in view of rook d3, I think. He would line up on the d file. So I'm going to play queen g6. Now, it looks tempting for him to play the move knight e5, attacking my queen and also my light square bishop. But if he does that, he's going to get checkmated on g2. That's the effect of those long-range pieces, the bishop plus the queen in concert. He could play knight h4, which would attack my queen and also defend g2. That move would be acceptable, but really he should be thinking about how to get out of this pin. He should probably think about, well, it's kind of tough now actually, because if he moves his queen, let's say queen to c1, I can take on d2 with my bishop, and if that knight gets deflected away, then queen takes g2 once again is a problem. Yeah, so he might be in big trouble. c3 is a pretty good move. Now he blocks me from taking. I could grab that pawn on a5. I could also play bishop c5. Let's just grab the pawn. Bishop c5 was very tempting as well, though. Attacking his rook. But hey, pawn's a pawn. It's good to be greedy, as long as it doesn't compromise your position in some way. So I might put the bishop back on b6, and then I would have two gorgeous bishops bearing down on his king. Queen e2, yep, smart move, gets out of the way. So no d-file pressure. Let's play the bishop back here, attacking his rook. I have an idea in mind. Assuming he moves his rook to a safe square, let's say to e7, his queen on e2 is going to be somewhat overloaded. Maybe I'll demonstrate that after the game. Knight h4, okay, so he is attacking the queen in a way where he will not get mated on g2 because the knight defends. But what can I do right here that ensures that I can win his rook on the next move? If you want to figure that out, pause your video. Okay, so I can play queen to b1 check. He has to get out of the check, and then I can take his rook. Although, he could play queen e1 technically, but I would trade, and then either his bishop or his rook would be undefended. Yeah, because now he had to get out of the check, so we have time to go and capture his rook with our bishop. Now we're up material. All right, I see a good move here to try to encourage further trade, so I'm going to do it. Queen e4. Hitting his queen, also hitting his knight on the rim. Yeah, so we're again in trade down mode because we're ahead in material. His bishop on d2 is defended. He is attacking here. I'm going to go take the bishop, though. If I get too greedy and take on f3 right away, he could recapture with his knight, and his knight would be defending the bishop. So I just want to take this right away. He'll take me, and now I've got 3 pawns versus only his 1 on this wing. I'm just going to start advancing the distantmost pawn and my pass pawn. Knight f3, let's not get too wrapped up in our plan that we drop our rook. Let's just bring the rook here, get behind his c-pawn. Yeah, we can gobble this pawn. Yeah, and he dropped the knight. Okay, and he resigns. Good game by GOX, though. GOX, if you watch this video, excellent play. I think you did a lot of correct things in this game, and I can tell you're a player that with some refinements to your game, you can definitely rise up the rankings because you played good fundamental chess for the most part in this one. And it's not easy when you're playing a higher rated player, too. So moves that I would say that you could improve on would be a3, definitely. I mean, that move is not great. There's just many more useful moves like the Joko piano, as we've talked about, bishop c4, or if you prefer the Ruy Lopez, bishop b5. So I simply developed and attacked his e4 pawn. Here I did mention that if bishop c5, usually a good developing move, there's the possibility of the so-called center fork trick, knight takes e5. Idea being knight takes e5 and then d4, and white gets to grab some center space and also ensure that he wins back a minor piece. So that's why I played the d6 move, move number 4. h3, this move I'm more okay with than a3 because he does stop me from coming to g4, and the position is not open enough yet where I can just immediately crush him for having played sort of a slow move like that. I guess I could maybe have played for d5, but I was just focused on developing my pieces. So h3, bishop e7. He played bishop b5 and then bishop d7. Yeah, now he takes. I see this a lot. Do not do this. Don't willingly trade your bishops for knights for no good reason. Moreover, you definitely shouldn't do it when you weren't even provoked by me pushing my a pawn. So yeah, taking simply allows me to recapture, and now he has to respond to this, and I have the 2 bishops. Queen d7. I mentioned that against someone in my own rating, I might not have made that move, only because I see that the plan of moving this knight and actually pushing the pawn to f5 is a pretty good one here. So I'm not sure, but maybe against someone a little higher rated, I might have tried more aggressively to prepare f5 and get my bishop working a little bit sooner on this diagonal. I want to knock down this e4 pawn somehow, and pushing d5 is a little harder logistically to arrange because of knight takes e5. So pushing the f pawn might be good, but I think queen d7 is a fine move all around. And then h6 would be fine here. I just decided to move my rooks to the files in the center in anticipation of the center becoming open. And to his credit, he did not play bishop takes f6, so he did not repeat his mistake from earlier in taking on c6. Yeah, and once he does a4, he's threatening to trap my bishop with b5, so I did have to respond with a6. If he plays b5 now, I have 1, 2, 3 defenders or attackers of that square, and he only has 1, 2 defenders. So he would lose a pawn out of that. So he played a5, I went h6. And then we don't want to be so hasty with our plan that we overlook the opponent's counterplay. So d5, if I had played that right now, would have dropped the e5 pawn. So that's why I played bishop f8, enabling the rook to defend it. He played rook e1, and finally I get d5 in. Take, take. And as I said, I think it's good to take with the bishop here, or rather the knight here, and keep our light square bishop. Bishop takes d5 would also be all right. I just think it's nice to have the queen and bishop working together down the diagonal. You can see the pressure that generated as the game progressed. And now he noticed the attack on the b4 pawn, so he played bishop d2. That was good. And I continued opening the center. So those rook moves that I made to the middle of the board turned out to pay off because you can see I was in a good position to capitalize on the open files in the middle. He was pinned down on the d file. Yeah, and I would say this is like the first mistake he made, rook a3, but he's lasted 20 plus moves before making a mistake. That's excellent. He's going to go far with that. Probably he should play something like, it's kind of tough, but maybe queen c1. That way he gets out of the pin. Actually, queen c1 doesn't really solve the problem, does it? I can take because I have my queen backing it up. Maybe pawn to c3 and just firmly defend the pawn chain. He's still in a pin, though. I mean, this is much better for black, but maybe this was a better attempt. Yeah. But after that rook a3 move and I started winning some material, if I can back it up to one of those moments. So rook a3, I took b4. Rook e3, he counterattacked my queen, queen g6. It's difficult. I mean, he's going to be down a pawn or two now, and he maybe missed queen b1 check. But this is a tough position. Actually, he might be losing material regardless, because I mentioned for a moment that his queen was overloaded. So if he had played his rook to a safe square trying to escape my bishop, I did have this idea. Bishop takes f3. His g-pawn is pinned. He cannot capture that way. He'd have to take with the queen, but that leaves the bishop on d2 undefended. And I'm not getting back rank checkmated when my rook leaves the back rank because my king can escape to h7. Okay, let's play one more game, and then we're going to call it a session. See who we get in our specified rating range. We've had a decent mix of e4 and d4 games. No one has thrown anything totally off the wall. Like no one has played like h4 on move 1 or something. You won't see as much of that. I mean, you will run into people who have their pet lines that they like to do, like the grob or something, or b4, the orangutan. The orangutan's funny. There is a rule in chess that says don't play openings named after animals because they're almost always bad. There are some exceptions, but if you're studying an opening and it's named after an animal, do some research into whether that opening is actually good. Still looking for a game. The Sinquefield Cup in St. Louis is currently going on right now, so there are a ton of players online. So I'd be surprised if I wasn't able to get a game somehow pretty quickly. But you never know. Could also play the computer, but playing a computer is kind of lame. All right, you know what? I'm going to play this player. His rating, his seek disappeared. There was a player who was looking for a 5-minute no increment game that I was about to play. Oh, one thing I did want to mention too. So from maybe I can just create a quick analysis board as long as we're waiting. So from the white side, when you're playing e4 and you face things other than e5, because we've mostly faced e5 so far. So let's say you face either the French, which is e6, the Pirz, which is d6, or the Caro-Kann, which is c6. So against all of those moves, I would recommend playing d4 and just occupying the center immediately. If your opponent is allowing you to get a pawn duo out there like that, go ahead and do it. It's a little harder to give specific advice against the Sicilian c5, because this is a great opening, and you're going to face it as an e4 player, if you are an e4 player, as you rise up the rating ladder. But for now, I would recommend playing knight f3, and then playing for d4 thereafter. All right, so Phoenix 888 is our final opponent, so let's play e4. He's got a picture of Garry Kasparov, very intimidating. Knight f3. Is that the Macedonian flag? Yeah, Macedonia. All right, and we get a chance to do our Joko piano. And typically, black plays either bishop c5 or knight f6. Knight f6, there you go. And I'm going to see how he reacts to knight g5. The possibility of this move is one reason why I personally like to play bishop c5, and I recommend it to lower-rated players on move 3 for black. He reacts correctly d5. Now, if he takes with the knight, I will have an opportunity to do the so-called fried liver. Now, knight takes f7 technically is not the best move here. d4 is supposed to be stronger, but knight takes f7 is the move that I think is easier to remember and play. d4 leads to some not incredibly complex lines, but this way seems more natural to me always, and it's a lot of fun too. So the idea is that after you sacrifice the knight on f7, you can follow with queen f3 check, forking the king and the knight. Now, if black wants to make this interesting, they should play king to e6 and defend the knight in the middle, even though they're just striding out in the open with their king before move 10. If they play something like king g8, though, they're going to get mated very quickly. Bishop takes d5. Yeah, and king e8 also. Problem is I take here. Now I'm attacking his knight twice, and he's going to get checkmated. Yeah, he blundered mate. Okay, so that was a very quick one to finish up. But I think the course of this game and the fact that an 1187 was checkmated that quickly, that was a 9-move game, that kind of shows the danger of playing the two knights variation. I will not say that the two knights is bad. It's just that if you play this line, you have to know what you're doing, because knight g5 is a very serious move, attacking f7. f7 is the weakest point on the board at the outset of the game. Same with white, f2. And any opening where your opponent is trying to attack that square very early, you have to take seriously. So d5 is correct, because that interferes with the bishop defending the pawn. Or the bishop attacking the pawn, rather. After take, though, black should not play knight takes d5. So knight a5 is one move that you can play here, which attacks the bishop. This is a gambit line. After bishop b5 check, black should play c6. Pawn takes c6, pawn takes c6, bishop back to e2. And black is down a pawn now, but they do tend to gain a lot of tempos by harassing white's knight. But if you're playing this opening, this is something you got to investigate. Check out like the chess.com opening explorer, for instance. If you have a database, if you happen to have a database of games, which is available from a company like chessbase.com, explore that. But do some research on your own, because you don't want to be surprised like my opponent was when I took on f7. So this is the fried liver. It's very famous. Knight takes d5 and knight takes f7 characterizes the fried liver attack. As I said, d4 is supposed to be the better move. One point of d4 is that if they take with the knight, I believe c3 is good. And if this knight moves, the knight on d5 would be attacked twice behind it. So white's queen would be joining the attack. And yeah, d4 is supposed to be the stronger move, but knight takes f7 gets played a lot. And then after king takes, queen check. One line I will demonstrate before I wrap up here is, if black plays the best move, king e6, helping to defend the knight, white should develop and attack this knight on d5. So knight c3 is a good move. Currently, white is down a piece for a pawn, but you gain a lot of play based on how you're going to proceed. So now black has to defend the knight. And one line goes knight cb4, defending it this way. The knight on b4 is kind of shaky. Some players even play a3, trying to divert it from the defensive d5 immediately. That allows knight takes c2 check, followed by knight takes a1, which is a little crazy for my liking. I've always played the move queen e4 here, simply defending the c2 pawn and threatening to play a3. And after this move, they typically play c6, reinforcing the knight. Now we can play a3, driving the knight away, back to a6. And here, white should give up on trying to pressurize d5 further, at least for the moment, and instead focus on attacking the pin pawn on e5, which is another virtue of having put the queen on e4. So we can attack that pawn on e5, and black has to be very cautious. If they play a move like bishop d6, then white can take on d5, because the bishop on d6 would be interfering with the queen. If they play queen d6, trying to defend both points, then white gets to do fun stuff like bishop f4. And notice the two pins at work. Pawn takes is illegal. It's pinned. And so is knight takes, also illegal. He's pinned. So black can would have to expect to lose the e5 pawn next. White might be able to play bishop takes e5, and white's gaining another pawn back. Black's king is completely exposed. This is not a line you want to venture down if you're black. So that's why if you're trying to debate between the two knights variation and the Joko piano, bishop c5, I would recommend bishop c5 for most players. You just have a higher margin of safety, because if bishop c5 on move 3, knight g5 would be a blunder. Queen takes g5. Okay, so we got some nice games in. Hope you guys learned some stuff. As you see, many of the strategies that worked, and by strategies I mean just fundamental, solid, classical play, many of those themes were operating at this level too, and they will continue to operate as we go to 1200 to 1400, 1400 to 1600, etc. You can see from these games that my opponents made a lot of errors involving undefended pieces. They were often just giving me free pieces and pawns. I think they were making more confident decisions, but there was still a lot of recklessness involved in those decisions. And if you're aware of how to take advantage, and you're aware of those undefended points in your opponent's position, undefended pieces, you can win a lot of games. So thank you guys for watching. Please leave me any feedback if you have it. And stay tuned for the next part of the series, which will be the rating level 1200 to 1400. All right. Bye, guys.